All right, so thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Drew Grandy. I'm the Clean Energy Program Director with Mass Climate Action Network. Excited to have all of you on tonight. I think you're really going to enjoy our speakers and learn a lot about some climate legislation that's being working its way through the State House right now. You're going to hear directly from those sponsors of each of those bills. Joining us tonight is Representative Tami Gouveia, Representative Natalie Higgins, and Representative Lori Ehrlich. So thank you all to each of our speakers. At the end of this presentation from each of our speakers, we are going to do a moderated discussion. We do encourage people to type in questions into the chat group if you have anything. The one thing we do ask is please try to hold back from answering each other's questions. It can be distracting and it can cause a lot of the questions to be missed if we do that. We are recording this webinar, and we will put it onto our YouTube channel and on our website under Past Webinars tab. We will send around the links that you can share with folks in your community or your network if you found this helpful at all. So let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, my name is Drew. I'm with I'm the Clean Energy Program Director with MCAN. MCAN was founded in the year 2000. We're a learning network of chapters across Massachusetts taking action to solve climate change. We have 50 chapters representing more than 75 cities and towns. And if you're not already a chapter, we'd be happy to welcome you to your local group. We focus on climate solutions and do everything from helping groups get climate-friendly laws passed through town meeting or city councils to giving you all a voice at the state level on policies and programs. Tonight's webinar is about how you can help move forward climate legislation at the local level. One other person I would like to introduce, we do have a couple board members from MCAN on tonight. Recognize Mary Duarte, Andrea Ranger, Henrietta Davis, and Ted McIntyre. Would like to turn it over to Henrietta to say a few words about MCAN and our legislative action team. So Henrietta, if you can go ahead and say hello to everyone. Henrietta, you're off mute.
I'm unmuted now.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you this evening and learn about these very interesting bills that are coming forward to the legislature. Mary Duarte and I have been working on the legislative team for the last 2 years, and the coming term, we're looking for a bunch of you to help us, or all of you to help us, really, to move these bills forward. It's a two-year process, and there are several times during the year that's important to contact either your local officials to have them send a letter of support, or perhaps yourself be in touch with state reps and senators. So we'll be reaching out to you, looking forward to working with you, and look for the contact number at the end of the show. But of course, we know who you are, and we'll be back in touch with you too. Thanks.
Thank you, Henrietta. And also, as another note, tonight is the first in a series of legislative conversations that we're holding. Tonight's focus will be on a few pieces of net zero legislation as well as a clean transportation bill. We will be discussing other pieces of legislation in following webinars. But for right now, I'd like to do a quick introduction to some of our speakers who will be on for us. Representative Tami Gouveia will be talking about the Net Zero Stretch Energy Code. Representative Natalie Higgins will be talking about the increasing net zero homes in gateway cities. This is our net zero bill focusing on low-income households, both renters and homeowners. And our final presenter for tonight is Representative Lori Ehrlich, talking about an act to advance modern and sustainable solutions for transportation. So right now, what I would like to do is get started with our first presenter, which is Representative Tami Gouveia. Tami, if you're ready, we are ready for you. And thank you for joining us tonight.
I am ready, thank you. And somebody else will be advancing my slides, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. This has been very well organized. Really appreciate you pulling us together, and really excited to be here as part of the kickoff of this series. I am Tami Gouveia. I represent the 14th Middlesex District, which is all of Concord and Carlisle. Very, very active in the climate change movement and addressing environmental policies. And then also I represent half of Acton and a couple of precincts in Chelmsford as well. And just to give a little bit of a quick context, you probably know that over 6,000 bills were filed. On the House side, we had 2 weeks to file our legislation and then 2 weeks to sign on as co-sponsors. And I did a quick search in our system when I was presenting to another climate group a couple weeks ago, and just noticed based on searches using search terms solar, energy, electric vehicles, carbon pricing, and transportation, that there were over 600 bills filed related to these issues. So we have a strong, I think, interest, and there are a number of people who are in the legislature now, even more than had been there before, who are really taking up this issue of climate change and have been focused on renewable energy and expanding renewable energy access as part of their campaign. So it's really exciting to have new people like myself up in the building, as well as, Rep. Higgins and Rep. Ehrlich, who have been there, fighting for these issues. So the bill that I filed is an act to establish a net zero energy code. I co-filed it with Senator Joe Comerford from Northampton. Next slide. And so what this bill does is it basically directs the board of BBRS to develop and define a net zero energy building, and then fully adopt and fully implement a net zero stretch energy code by 2030 at the local level. And it will enable the board to develop the system and the timeline for implementation to net zero by this timeline of 2030. And it also enables the board to consider the needs of environmental justice communities. This has been something that we've talked quite a bit in the House, and I actually came into the field of public health through environmental justice. So this is something that, as a state rep, I personally care about, and I'm really glad to make sure that that was part of this bill in particular through the conversations with MCAN and other advocates. Next slide. So as many of you probably know, I oftentimes hear, we really need to get a handle on transportation as it relates to carbon emissions, and that's definitely true. It accounts for 40% of emissions. But what oftentimes gets overlooked is the role that buildings play in contributing to climate pollution in the state. Next slide. So you can see here 40%. So what exactly is the Stretch Energy Code? I've been on a steep learning curve in this position, having just been sworn in for the first time in January of this year. So I had a lot to learn, and one of the things that I've learned a lot about is Stretch Energy Code and Green Communities Act, and just kind of getting a little bit more conversant in the details of that act and how it relates to the Stretch Energy Code piece of legislation that I filed. But many of you probably know that in 2008 this act was passed. And it incentivizes municipalities to adopt more sustainable practices to make sure that we have state funding for communities to adopt certain state standards around energy efficiency and planning specifically. And in order for communities to meet the requirements of the Green Communities Act, they have to adopt more energy efficient building practices. So we have one building code in Massachusetts that governs standards everywhere. And so we basically, with the Green Communities Act, the BBRS created the Stretch Energy Code, which is basically an appendix to the base building code to make sure that there are requirements in place around energy efficiency that go beyond what's in the base code. Next slide. Great. So you can see here, as of December 2018, more than 250 communities have adopted the Stretch Energy Code. Next slide. But there's no statutory requirement to update the Stretch Energy Code or to improve the energy efficiency standards in that specific code. So basically it operates much more like a ceiling and not a floor, and there are many cities and towns that want to do even more and go beyond what that ceiling right now provides. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but Let's see. Okay, great. So the base building code is updated regularly, but the energy efficiency standards are moving much more slowly. And so, next slide. The bill that I filed ensures that the definition is inclusive to building types that are not strictly net zero, but they're really critical to the cost effectiveness in achieving climate goals. And in creating the definition, there are, I think, at least 2 places where we've mentioned EJ communities, making sure that we're really inclusive and going out and really engaging folks in the conversation to ensure that people can also afford what we're trying to propose here. Next slide, or that the BBRS will be proposing. So what are the implementation options? Next slide. So in our sort of taking a look, my staff and I, we found a couple different options. There's the Cambridge model. The City of Cambridge has been planning to phase in net zero practices by building type. So a municipal building, residential buildings, multifamily, you can sort of see the list here. But there are other ways that it could also be done in terms of the implementation. The stretch code right now uses the HERS index, so the BBRS could implement benchmarks to gradually move municipalities to net zero by 2030, or they could use some other implementation scheme, which is putting in requirements based on the year of implementation of the stretch code, so the year that a municipality joined and became a green community. Next slide. So who supports this bill? You can find out the list of sponsors. MCAN and other advocates have been really super helpful in making sure that we have more people who are signing on to this bill, the MAPC as well, and Mass Power Forward. So you can check out here, masslegislature.gov, bills 191 HD 3931 is this particular bill, the Stretch Energy Code bill. Next slide. And I know the focus of this is really about what you can do to sort of get things moving at the local level and at the state level. It's really helpful if you talk to your local planning board members, municipal leaders, and other community actors about this idea, particularly if you are in a green community. But we do want to make sure that we're trying to pull other people along and get other people in. Reach out to your representative to share your perspective and to ask them to sponsor the Senate version. So I sort of alluded to this in my introduction that on the House side, we had 2 weeks to co-sponsor bills. On the Senate side, they have up until the bill is heard or voted on, actually, to be able to sign on as a co-sponsor. So that means House members can sign on to the Senate version, which is SD 2212. And you'll notice that we're using SD and HD. That's because these are still docket numbers. They have not been assigned bill numbers because they haven't been referred to their committee. So once they get referred to the primary committee that they'll be heard by, they will then get a new number, which will be either an SB for Senate bill or HB for House bill. We encourage you to testify at a hearing, but don't worry if you miss a hearing, if you can't get into Boston to testify in person at a hearing, your letters to the committee chairs, to the members of the committee, and to your state representative and state senator are really important. And then you can sign up for updates with my office at tamigouveia.com, and you can also follow me on social media. Right here, my Twitter handle and Facebook and everything is Tami Gouveia, MA. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. I look forward to the conversation and to answering any questions you have.
Thank you, Representative Gouveia. And if anyone on the webinar tonight does have any questions, we do encourage you to type those into the chat menu, and we'll be doing that moderated discussion at the end. And I'm sure Rep. Gouveia will be happy to answer any questions that are directed towards her or specifically on this bill. But right now, I'd like to introduce Representative Natalie Higgins to talk about HD 3562, a way to help out net zero households in gateway cities. Representative Higgins, if you're there, we are ready for you. Yep, Representative Higgins? Okay, I think we're having some issues on that end there. What we can do is, Representative Ehrlich, if you are on and ready to go, we got you unmuted, and we can skip forward to you right now if you are ready to go. Okay, so we do have Rep. Higgins on the line, but we are unable to hear her at the moment. Let's see. Hold on. Bear with me 1 second. We're just having some issues. I got to find the right phone number here. While we are dealing with this, I think we have a question in the chat group. Representative Gouveia, given that we have the authority to set energy codes, can we adopt a roadmap to bring our base energy code in line with zero energy buildings, as well as the stretch code, which really only applies to the 214 communities that have opted into the program? What about the 125 plus communities in Massachusetts? Can we set energy codes to make all buildings net zero?
Okay, is there a way that you can show that to me? That's a lot of words.
Yeah, so let's break that down for a second here. We'll start with the first question here.
That'd be great.
Can we adopt a roadmap to bring our base energy code in line with zero energy buildings as well as the stretch codes? I think the question is it possible to increase the base code while at the same, start with the base code before we do the stretch code, I think is the question. So what is the process for increasing the building energy codes?
That's a really great question. Okay, I'm understanding what the attendee is asking. So I'm not an expert in building codes or energy codes or anything like that. So if there's somebody else who knows more, I invite them to maybe put into the chat and they can clarify. But in my conversations with folks, architects and other people who are, live in the world of building codes all the time, what they've told me is that it takes a long time to come up with the next iteration of the base code. But and my understanding is that those conversations are going on for the next version. But this is a way to try to accelerate and get a sort of a moving in the direction of net zero buildings even faster. There probably is, BBRS could go and adopt this right now on their own, but the legislation in many ways is hopefully a way to encourage movement in this direction and to get the conversation going. so that we're moving more quickly to adopting building codes that require builders to incorporate, zero energy, net zero energy into the building design and into the actual build out. But like I said, I'm not an expert in this, so if somebody has additional information to clarify, I defer to others on the call.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to try Rep. Higgins again, if you're there.
Drew, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your patience for that.
No problem. Apparently I had to do one more thing, even though we could chat before it all got started. So sorry about that. Thank you, MCAN, for setting up this opportunity. I'm really excited to talk about HD 3562 that I'm working on with Representative Vargas, and to be on this first webinar with Rep. Gouveia and Rep. Ehrlich. So HD 3562, an act relative to increasing net zero homes in gateway cities. I'm the representative for the 4th Worcester District, which is one of our gateway cities, the city of Leominster, and we really wanted to introduce some legislation that would make it easier for low-income families in gateway cities to be able to get their homes and their transportation to net zero. If we have all of, the idea behind it is, if we have all of these programs that are supposed to help incentivize reducing our carbon emissions and moving towards net zero, why don't we, in step 1, do a study of all of the programs that are out there to see kind of what's available, what folks can take advantage of, with the hope of maybe finding a better way to package it for low-income families, either renters or homeowners, and to try to figure out what are those gaps that we can fill that maybe are lower cost. And then in the 2nd and 3rd year, developing with the Department of Energy Resources, the Mass Clean Energy Center, and the Department of Housing and Community Development, 2 pilot projects in at least 3 gateway cities, working with at least 150 low-income households to see how does this work and how can we help our low-income families really access programming to reduce their energy costs and bring them down to net zero. So more simple, and the biggest piece is just pulling all of these resources together to make sure that the programs can work in tandem with one another, and that we believe while someone might take advantage of assistance to tap into shared solar or solar farms or rooftop solar, they might not know about the other programs that exist related to transportation or other energy efficiency in your home. So just making sure that we can create a one-stop shop so that folks who want to invest in this can access all of those incentives all at the same time.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Higgins. Thank you again, and also do encourage people are typing into the chat message. If you do have questions, we do encourage you to keep doing that, and we will come back to our Q&A. In the meantime, we would like to get Representative Ehrlich on to talk about the transportation bill that she has sponsored for this session. Representative Ehrlich, if you are on, we have you unmuted at the moment. If you can speak up, we are ready for you. Okay, we're still having a little bit of trouble right now with Representative Ehrlich's audio, so in the meantime, I think what we might do is if Representative Higgins and Rep. Gouveia are ready, I think we might be able to answer another question. So Representative Gouveia, we have a question here about municipalities and net zero stretch codes. Is it something they can do on their own, or does state legislation have to pass first?
My understanding is that, as one of the slides demonstrates, the code is a ceiling, and we want it to be much more like a floor. So my understanding is that municipalities cannot go beyond what's in their current stretch code. I don't know if someone else has other information on that, but that is in part why this legislation is filed, is that there are some municipalities that would like to go a lot further, and they are not able to do that because they don't have the building codes that allow them to do that. Now, it doesn't mean that a developer can't, build net zero housing or, a retail shop on their own that has net zero. But it means that, it's not required by the municipality.
Thank you. I think we can do one more here. Is coming back to one of the questions that were asked earlier. So we saw on the map that you had up that not every community has the stretch code. So while about 2/3 of the state does, about 125 communities in Massachusetts right now do not have a stretch code in place. Is there anything that we can do or those communities can do to increase the stretch code in those communities so that they have that in place?
Some of those communities don't, it's hard in terms of a capacity issue. It's pretty challenging or somewhat challenging in terms of resources to be able to join as a green community. And so some of it is really about resources. So I don't know if you can pull the slide back up so we can take a look at it while we're talking about it. It might be helpful to have the visual in front of us if it's not too complicated.
I think we're just waiting for that to load up right now. We have it on the screen.
Okay. So yeah, if you take a look at the map, you can see that it is that the places that are the municipalities that don't have this stretch code and are not part of the green communities are the ones that are in smaller rural parts of the state for the most part. There are some exceptions here and there. I did, 10 years worth of work in Lawrence. I kind of have a sense of how strapped they are in terms of their resources at the local level. But many of these other cities and towns are just very, very small.
Okay, I think, all right, so thank you. And I think we have Rep. Ehrlich on the line right now. So Rep. Ehrlich, are you there with us again?
I am here.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate your patience for that.
Sure, no problem. Thrilled to be here. Thank you, Drew, for putting this together. I'm, excited to present the bill. Also excited to hear from my two colleagues. There's nothing like a tutorial on their bills. So I'm an interested consumer as well. Before we begin, I just want to make a slight correction to my slide. It says HD 3009. As it turns out, that too is my bill, but that is not this bill. So I don't want everybody to look up the wrong bill. So it's HD 3008. It's one away from there. So just adjust if anybody wants to advocate. And the Senate docket is Senate docket 1541. And should I just jump right in and start talking about this bill?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So you can change the slide, especially since the docket number's wrong. Okay. So I go back quite a ways with MCAN and with the environmental movement. I was heavily involved in cleaning up the Salem power plant many years ago, and I go way back to the Filthy Five, which were actually 6, and the power plant battles. As part of that process, we were part of the advocacy behind establishing something called RGGI. And RGGI, which is RGGI, is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. If people are dialing into this call, they probably know all about RGGI, but I just to establish sort of a baseline of what we're building on, RGGI allowed for a regional approach to capping power plant emissions and then pricing the carbon, trading it, and actually generating income for green energy projects within each state. I personally have, enjoyed seeing some of that RGGI money help the power plant in my backyard here practically transition off of coal. I have to say I was not terribly delighted it went to gas, but the project, the funds that were generated did help make that transition. So what this bill does, it takes that RGGI model, which is a tried and true model at this point. It's over a decade old. It's had great success in Massachusetts and regionally. Regional emissions from electricity production are actually down 35% since the program started, and it's generated more than $400 million for green energy projects and mass save and other efficiency programs. So it has a tried and true history, and now there's an attempt now, it's more than an attempt, there's a commitment now on behalf of Massachusetts, on behalf of our governor, to join 8 other states, so it's a total of 9 states, plus Washington, D.C., to do a sort of RGGI model, a cap and trade model for transportation emissions. Now, if you look at a pie chart of our state's emissions, our emission profile, it fluctuates, but generally, we have a third power plants, a third transportation, and a third thermal energy. So this is really an attempt to put in sort of a market-based cap and trade program and really harness the power of regionalization. So with the combined total of 9 states and Washington, D.C., you actually get a GDP of $3.33 trillion. It would, it's 17% of our whole nation's GDP is within these 9 states. And the transportation emissions are 254 million tons of CO2. So the potential is there, and I'm really thrilled that we're going to be part of it and playing a leading role. But the question that came about is when the cap and trade model starts generating revenue and it comes back to the state, what is going to happen with that money? And that is still an open question. So I filed this bill really to put guardrails on that revenue coming back to the state. So we have we have projects that are good. Thank you for changing the slide. Where we created the Modern and Sustainable Solutions for Transportation Trust Fund, which will hold the money. And then we have a 15-member board to really establish where we want to go and how we can advance statewide transportation, our investment goals. So the board consists actually of very, some people that you would expect to be on the board. And then we also have some communities that usually don't have a say. So let me just run through some of these. The 15-member board will consist of the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Department, the DEP, appointed by the Commissioner, Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, and then one person representing each of the following. Each is appointed by the Governor. So organized labor, regional transit authorities, regional planning agencies, environmental justice populations, environmental organizations, low-income consumers, businesses, clean transportation business and industry, experts in the science of climate change, and the western region of the Commonwealth, and municipal interests. So we've really tried to sort of get at to make sure that those who sometimes don't have a voice are given a voice. We're trying to regionalize this conversation a little bit and really, bring the conversation statewide. So as we do that, the board will have specific mandates, or it will have its mission laid out for us, and then it will have to report back on the performance of the climate program and the investments that are made. That really is the gist of it. It's not that complicated, but what I'm hoping, and what everybody who's been working on this is hoping, is that we can make sure that it isn't just a purely executive program, that the legislature and various other voices will have input as to how the money is spent. So we like to think of it as guardrails, but we are the bill is off to a tremendous start. We have support from the pages of my colleagues for co-sponsorship, which is great and largely credited to the hard work of the advocates who are up at the State House. And there does seem to be a lot of enthusiasm behind this. So I'm excited to go forward. I'm excited to work with Senator Eric Lesser, who's from Western Mass, and look forward to working with everybody, every single person on the call tonight, to make sure that this goes forward. So hopefully that sums it up okay.
Thank you, Representative Ehrlich, and thank you for introducing that bill for us and kind of giving us the background and where we can potentially go with it. What we're going to do right now is open up our kind of final portion here of the webinar tonight and go back to the chat group the chat that we have open. If you do, I know we've already answered a lot of these, couple of these questions already, but we do have our representatives still on the webinar with us right now. So if you do have a question, we do encourage you to type that in and be able to get it answered directly from the sponsors of each one of these three bills. I think we have a question here for Rep. Gouveia. So we're going to go back to you. And what this is about is, the question is about the stretch energy code coming into effect in 2030 and not earlier. If you can talk a little bit about, there's a lot of concern about the need to move forward in order to take action on climate, but if you could talk a little bit about why that target date is 2030 and why maybe it's not, why there's some obstacles from keeping us from doing that sooner than 2030.
Sure, it's a really fair and great question. Listen, I would love to have all of these policies in place right now. The challenge is that, first of all, we have to get these bills passed. On average, it takes about 6 years for a bill to pass, unfortunately. So there's a little bit of sort of realism that we're trying to have in thinking about how this will all roll out. So that's one piece. The second piece is really making sure that we have a definition that accounts for environmental justice, communities, and affordability. Not that that's the affordability is the driving factor, but it does, there is some need to pay attention to how much some of this is going to cost so that we understand what the challenges might be for municipalities to move forward with this. And then the third piece is, now I forget what I was going to say. The third piece is just coming up with the definition of itself and getting broad enough agreement with the definition, and then having BBRS have the time to work through what the implementation is. So that's a little bit of what is driving it. We went back and forth with going out a little bit further to 2040, and 2030 felt like it was trying to move forward quickly. but not so quickly that we wouldn't be able to get things moving in this direction. But like I said, I would love to have all of these things in place now. And I oftentimes talk about the fact that, you know, we're living with the consequences of the decisions that people made before us. And it's really up to us to start to make very different decisions to make sure that we have a sustainable place for us to live who are here and now, but generations far into the future, 25, 50, 100 years from now. So I appreciate the question.
And Rep. Gouveia, I think an important part on here to reinforce what you were saying, but part of that also, the bill itself does not set forward what the stretch energy code will do, but tells BVRS to develop that code. So that gives them time to figure out where that code should be and how it fits in with the building code itself.
Correct.
Okay, great. So Rep. Ehrlich, we have a couple questions coming in right now regarding the transportation bill. And along the same line, if you could talk broadly as far as timeline for the bill itself is the first question we have. So if you could take us through what is coming up and where you see next steps and action items for it coming up that people can participate in.
Okay, the agreement between the states aims to work together over the next year to develop that framework for the regional program. I know this was developed through the Transportation Climate Initiative, TCI. Many of you will probably hear TCI as attached to this bill. It stands for Transportation and Climate Initiative. But Massachusetts has to work with the other member states to study, the feasibility of the program, and also there's a commitment to 6 regional listening sessions around the state over the course of the year. So that will unfold. So to answer, I guess the quick answer is just over the next year. It was kicked off in December to great fanfare when the governor, the Baker administration announced that we were joining in with the other states. And actually, the list of states is kind of interesting. We have, in addition to Massachusetts, we have Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania is joining us this time, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Virginia. You may notice that one of the missing states, and it sort of is a gaping hole on a map, is New York. From what I understand, they may be joining us at some point, but they have not as of yet. So it's just a matter of all of these states getting together and really coming up with doing the work of listening and then establishing what the program will look like. We're sort of, this bill is sort of on the back end in, assuming that the program is established and then, when it is implemented, guiding that implementation. So did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. Rep. Ehrlich, we do have a couple other questions here regarding the transportation bill. I think the first one, before we get into the others, is do the other states have to pass a similar bill before the region works together with Massachusetts on this? So are we requiring each state to pass the same bill, or is each state passing their own bill within their home state?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's important to understand that this is an executive level program. It was really the governor who had the ability to join with the other states and make this regional program, this TCI program, happen. The other states do not have to pass a bill like the bill I'm proposing, but I hope they do. And we truly don't have to pass it either. We could just leave it all up to the governor. But I think it's really important, and I think maybe even the governor would think it was important that we have a broader conversation about modernizing our transportation, systems and infrastructure in so many ways. So I think, I do hope that other states do pass it, but no, they do not have to.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question here. We actually have a question here from the MCAN board president, Janet Bowser. I think this is a kind of on the mind of everyone, but can you talk a little bit more about how the revenue is generated through this transportation initiative?
Sure. I'm not sure I'm such a total expert on this, but my understanding is that the revenue comes from at the wholesale level. This is a price on carbon at the wholesale level. So it's a different concept than sort of the carbon tax ideas that are out there, in that it will be something that the consumer really won't recognize in a direct way. And I think it's based on BTUs maybe, or I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but based on the carbon intensity of the fuels, that's where the revenue comes off.
So as that fuel enters the state, rather than say as it enters the home to be burned for heating or
exactly
vehicles for transportation, but as those wholesalers import it into the state.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
Another question here, I think this is a good one for you. As a follow-up is, can you talk a little bit more on any direction or criteria on how those funds that are generated will be spent and how they'll be directed and how they'll be used?
Yeah, I mean, that is not actually laid out in the bill. We are just putting together the board and then putting in accountability for them. So they will need to report back to the Commonwealth to and evaluate where they have directed the money, how it's working. And our hopes is we're putting a lot of voices in the room, and it's really it was important to us to ensure that low-income environmental justice populations and people who are underserved by mass transportation are represented in the conversation. And we do not have specific guidelines for them, so it's just a matter of giving voices, giving the ability to be heard to people who are normally not part of the conversation.
Thank you. We have one more. I think we have one more question here for you. If the transportation bill is passed, would it limit the governor's ability to come to agreement with governors of the other 8 states? So,
no.
Does this bill limit any governor's availability? I'll let you take that.
Not at all. No, this is I think it's really helpful structurally to just look at this as membership in this region, with the other states is executive level, and then once the program is established and revenue comes into the state, that's where this bill comes in. So I guess, it is sort of an endorsement of the regional approach. I find that a very easy case to make, especially as somebody who's a student of RGGI, and seen the power of that. I think the power and potential of this regional approach for transportation is exciting, and it has such potential when it's not just the state of Massachusetts trying to curb climate change. It's a huge, significant region of the country, and significant economically, significant emission-wise, and and I think it's an opportunity for us to lead as a region. When RGGI was first established, Massachusetts helped to kick it off, And then when we elected Governor Romney, he actually pulled our state out of it. And then it didn't take very long, but we had to wait until we elected Governor Deval Patrick, and within, it was break.
I think we just lost Representative Ehrlich. Do encourage you to get back on if you are still there. If maybe you hit mute. We do have a question, Rep. Higgins, if you're still with us.
I'm still here.
Oh, great. So we have a question about working with low-income and EJ communities and the need for working with them to develop net zero, we'll call them living standards, and especially in the rental community, and how that can be difficult when the owner of the home doesn't necessarily live there. So how can you talk a little bit more about how your bill would address that?
Yeah, so I saw a comment that came through that was talking about kind of 40Bs and other affordable housing. So we're looking at ways that renters and homeowners can take advantage of these options. Obviously, with new development, I support kind of all of the different proposals putting forward to really hold new development to the standard of moving towards net zero. But when we're coming to retrofitting, we're really trying to figure out what are those options and how do we make it affordable for apartment dwellers. And living in a gateway city, a lot of our residents move year to year or every couple of years. So trying to figure out how to make it affordable in the short term if someone's not permanently living in there or thinking about living in their unit long term.
Great, thank you. Okay, I see Rep. Ehrlich is back on, and I have you unmuted if you want to finish the...
Yeah. So I'm not sure when I get disconnected, but I was just saying, I think there's a well-established, appreciation in Massachusetts of the power and potential of this regional approach to curbing emissions. So, I sort of lost my train of thought while I had to redial, but hopefully that caps off what I was saying before.
Thank you. So this brings us about to the end of our time tonight on this webinar. I do want to thank Representative Higgins, Representative Gouveia, and Representative Ehrlich for taking the time to join us tonight and being part of our legislative conversation webinar series. We will be having another webinar series later on in the middle of March. One of the topics that will be on there will be carbon pricing and the Roadmap 2050 bill. So we do encourage everyone that's participating tonight to come back again. I want to thank our board members who joined us tonight. And if anyone who is on here is interested in participating with MCAN as part of our legislative team, we do encourage you to check out our legislative page with the link that's on the screen here. But thank you all for participating, and once again, thank you to each of the reps for joining us tonight. This webinar will be posted on our YouTube page, and a link will be emailed out to everyone who participated. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening, and we look forward to having you all join us in future webinars and at the State House. Thank you.